Hello, everyone. Sorry, I just had a few computer problems. So it was a Zoom nightmare of your computer deciding to reboot just at entirely the wrong moment. It's so good to see you. My name's Christian Silverhampton. I'm the Dean of Church Planting at St Hill College. Delighted to welcome you to this webinar, and I'm sure others will be popping in later, and it will also be available to watch as a video afterwards. We're recording just the presenters, so your camera won't be on screen. If you have any concerns, you could just turn your camera off, and then it wouldn't have anything to pick up at all. Delighted to have John Keskeys and Alex Huson with us. I'll introduce them in a minute, but this is one of a number of webinars that we've got, and if you go to our website, sthillplanting.org, you can see, if you scroll down, you'll see links to all the past webinars that we've done. And also, this is one of two. This is the second of two, particularly looking at the subject of finance. The first was in September, so you can catch up on that afterwards. That's on the website. And that was Jay Moon, was talking particularly about how to plant and sustain church planting when the income from church donations and tithes and offerings isn't enough, looking at some creative solutions, particularly around using buildings, etc. So that one's available today. And then this webinar today will take a slightly different focus. Just for a moment, I'd love to just tell you a little bit about the Centre for Church Planting, ever so quick. We're involved in three key areas. The first is our church planting track, so you could come and study with us at St Hill College, do a course, and that could be for just a one-off module or an award, even a degree, a master's, even an applied doctorate. And we have a church planting track for that delivers not just the modules but forms a community with the fellow practitioners who are also involved in the same area, other people that you want to learn from and get understanding from. And we put on additional things in addition to the modules that might help just draw out some of the application of what the theory leads us to. And that's a great place for us to be also on the leading edge of catching the thinking and the learning that's happening at grassroots and then feeding that back into what we're teaching. Second is Seedbed, which is new, and Seedbed will launch next year, and it will offer training for lay people, and it will fit around working life, and it will provide more realistic training solutions for people who have to fit it around a job or other job-like commitments, either for people who feel called to be involved in church planting, or who may feel called to be involved in mission, perhaps as an evangelist or an inviter, or somebody who just carries the heart for that aspect of church in a new church or in an existing church. And there'll be a variety of programs that we're running, but all focused on lay people with a best of both model, some of which will be digital and some of which will be in person. And the third piece is the Centre for Church Planting, which is offering this webinar today. For example, we're working at large in the north of England, particularly wanting to engage with churches, networks, Baptist associations, dioceses, other groups who share that commitment to be involved in church planting and all the variety that exists. And we are doing a number of different programs, mainly orientated around training that exists to help people make the most of that, to train their teams, to develop the next steps of thinking, and also just a forum to bring them people together. And we link up with some of the other national initiatives like the Gregory Centre for Church Multiplication, New Wine Church Planting, Myriad, and others beyond who are also involved in church planting. Not to confuse people, but we're trying to work together so that if you connect with any of us, then we can link you into the same resources that you might need. Well, it's brilliant to invite John Keskeys and Alex Huson to speak to us today. Guys, I've forgotten to write down your job title, so I can't even introduce you properly. So I'm going to do, no one will notice. I'm going to say, hey guys, why don't you introduce yourselves? You're going to kick us off with some thinking, so we'll listen to you for a while, and then the second half of our time together, we want that to be driven by the people that are here. So that's for you to ask questions. What we've found really helps is if you can drop the ideas, the questions you're having into the chat, even if it's not yet a complete question, what it will do is it will trigger the questions for others. And then also when we get there, it helps us just to see some of the questions that are coming. So keep your eye on the chat, and I might remind you with a few chat messages myself. I'll probably pop some of my questions in the chat so that we can make really the best use of that second half hour time together. So John and Alex, thank you so much for being with us, and over to you for the next bit.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Christian. It's great to be here, and it's great to see everybody on the call. So I'm John Keskeys. I'm head of partnerships at Stewardship. And Stewardship is a Christian charity that's been going since 1906, serving the church and Christian charities. Alex, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I'll kick off.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Yeah, hey, everyone. My name's Alex. I am Church Planting Partnerships Executive at Stewardship. So my role is to connect with church planters and whatever stage of that journey that they're on to come alongside them and help just meet the needs that exist around finance, compliance and governance in the church planting world. So yeah, that's what I do.
Thanks very much. And for those some of you may know Stewardship, some of you may not, but you'll find that people know us for generosity, finance, governance, accounting, that sort of stuff. And quite often people then say, why church planting? But hopefully we'll be able to explain a little bit of our passion around church planting. So I'm just going to share screen, and then I can get started. Just bear with me a tick. Okay, so can you see the normal screen or the presenter view?
Yeah, you're good, John.
Excellent, brilliant. So so thank you for joining us. It's really good to be with you. So like I've said, at Stewardship, we're all about active generosity. And just taking you through what we're going to be doing today, it's the funding of new churches, and we want to just look at some key considerations for leaders. And some of those are really, really important. So I'm actually going to pray, because money is a really spiritual topic. And so I just want to invite God to come and have his way so that we can learn. So we pray, Holy Spirit, that you would come and fill us, that you would open our hearts, that you would open our minds to you, that you would teach us, and that you would inspire questions, and that you would inspire knowledge, so that we can actively pursue church planting in faith, but with good practice, because we want to see your kingdom advancing and healthy churches replicated in Jesus' name. Amen. Brilliant. So here's four of the areas we're going to aim to go through. The main question is, why is money important in the kingdom of God? And it's really, really important just to get the fact that it's not just about resources. Quite often people come to money because they need it, and they are looking for fundraising, or they're looking for different avenues because they need it. But actually, one of the things that I want to bring across today is that it's all about the heart. And that's one of the most important considerations throughout this presentation or our time together. But we'll look at what is active stewardship. What is this AAA for healthy churches? We've created something called the AAA for churches. I'll unpack that shortly. We'll then look at a few different funding models, but focusing on one particular one, which is often neglected. And then Alex will take you through a little bit of a case study of a real story of what happened in a church plant. So let's dive in. Here's a definition of stewardship. So it's utilizing and managing all resources God provides for the glory of God and the betterment of his creation. So when we actually thinking about active stewardship, what is it? Well, we clearly see it as a three-way partnership. It's a three-way partnership between givers, who are generous and faithful stewards of the resources that God's given them. It's a partnership then with receivers, churches, charities, church planters, missionaries, who are missional and faithful stewards with the resources that they receive from the givers, but recognizing that overall, God is the provider. He owns everything. Everything in all creation belongs to him, and he provides all, and his generosity personified. And so we need to understand what is our responsibility within this partnership, and we have to then become proactive in multiplying this in others through discipleship. And so in the context of church planting, this is really, really important, because you get the opportunity as church planters and leaders to set culture, and that is powerful. So when it comes to discipleship and money, who is our teacher? A really, really important question. Now, my parents didn't necessarily teach me about money in a way that I may have liked. But who taught you about money? And not just about money, who taught you about money and mission? And so when you combine the two together, how have we learned what we have learned to date? Because where we come from and what we have been taught shapes who we are now. But actually what we do now is even more important to shape who we will become, not just for ourselves, but for our family, for our ministries, and for those who follow us. And so culture can often shape our thinking, and it does predominantly in a lot of areas in the church today. So you can ask yourselves, what culture do I have around money? Because being from North, I'm from Newcastle, and quite often it seems like the further north you get in the country, the tighter things get, because we've had a tough history. I'm just thinking of things like the coal mining industry collapse in the northeast, and families, and they just shrunk together because it was like money was incredibly tight, and therefore the wallets became incredibly tight. You go even further north, it can get even more tighter. But that's not making judgments on people. It's just the reality of our culture around money. And then internationally as well, the culture of money in London is very different from the culture of money in America. And so we have to think of this in a church context. When you're combining cultures, where are we? And who has been our teacher? And what actually do we teach? Because quite often in the church, there's a prevailing thought or attitude of poverty. There's like a poverty mentality or a poverty spirit that we'd love to see broken, so that it will release more mission into the UK. And actually, who should be teaching us? It should be Scripture. It should be God. It should be faith in action. And so if we are not discipling people around money and finances, then our culture will disciple them. So we've got to fight for the hearts of our people and the hearts of the people of God for the future. So when we talk about fighting, there is a spiritual battleground. Alex, do you want to read these two, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Luke 12:15. Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions.
Yeah, and so we wanted to highlight, because when you're in church planting, you are pioneering and you are pushing into new areas. And it's about spiritual formation, it's about salvation, it's about discipleship. And so shaping of people's hearts is a massive spiritual battleground. And it clearly says here that you cannot serve two masters. It's as simple as that. So these are issues of the heart that we have to fight for and contend for, because mammon is a big problem. And I'll just go on to that in the future. But you can't teach other people that which you haven't learned yourself. So let's challenge ourselves in our own thinking, but in our hearts, because quite often we relate to, and I'm going to, from personal experience, quite often I used to relate to the scriptures and to God in an intellectual aspect, because I hadn't actually realized, or I didn't understand I knew that I needed to learn things from the heart, but I didn't know how. And so there's this 18-inch journey from the head to the heart to get revelation on actually how it affects our hearts and how we can then communicate life out of our hearts. So two foundational scriptures when it comes to that battle around money. And money itself, the word mammon, as it is in scripture, is a rival god. Now, and I want to talk about idolatry briefly, because money is a real interesting, interesting litmus test of where our hearts are. Now, anything that we trust in or that replaces or comes before Jesus is an idol. So please, let's deal with idols at heart level, and particularly thinking around finance and money. But mammon can mean more than money. It can mean stuff. It can mean things. It can be possessions. It can be fame or status. And so we have to be aware of these. And there's the typical three things: money, sex, and power. Focusing on money, it does affect the heart. So whether you have lots of it or whether you have not enough of it, don't let it touch your heart. Please recognize the lure of money, because there are many, many people, many godly people who have fallen because of money through temptation. And so I want to focus on this in order to help shape the giving aspect. We talked about that triangle of active stewardship. If we can help shape people's hearts when it comes to money, then we can give them confidence to relate to money well and release that generosity to be generous givers. So the second aspect is actually around the AAA. Now, the AAA was created as a way to measure creditworthiness of countries. I think it was in the 50s or the 60s. But Stewardship have created one for the church, and it's really interesting. So whether you're a charity or as a church, or whether you're not yet a charity, or you might never become a charity, there are principles throughout this, which are biblical principles, which we just want to take you through to learn because they're relevant for you. And so the AAA is around attitude, administration, and accountability when it comes to money. And the idea behind it is that if you steward his resources well, then actually you can turn money into mission, in the same way that a car turns fuel into power and momentum. And so, we get this opportunity to learn these things so that we can have momentum when it comes to mission and the resources that are required for it. So let's just have a quick look at a strange equation. Alex, do you want to read that scripture for us, please?
Yes. Sorry, 1 second.
No problem. This is the Macedonian church when Paul's actually doing some fundraising for the Jerusalem offering. And he uses the Macedonians as a little bit of an example for the Corinthian church. So it's quite an interesting.
Great. Yeah, so 2 Corinthians 8, verse 1 to 5. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us.
I mean, this equation does not work in the real world, but it works in God's economy. And so Paul is establishing something completely revolutionary here, that God's economy is completely different to the world. So think about it. The combination of the Macedonian church being in a very severe trial, you add to that their response is overflowing joy, but actually you add to that extreme poverty. How does that equate to rich generosity? Well, in the kingdom of God, it does, and it did. And so actually faith transforms. And so they gave beyond their ability, it says in one version. And I think the most important thing, it goes back to the heart. So they gave themselves to the Lord first, and then they gave themselves to Paul. And it wasn't about money, it was about themselves. And then the money flowed because it was they gave from the overflow of their heart. And so with this in mind as a foundation piece, let's start to look at what this AAA looks like, and then some key considerations when it comes to how to handle money well as someone who receives on behalf of a church or a charity. So when it comes to our attitude, Alex, can you pick up verse 22 and 24?
Yes, so 22 to 24, yeah?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. In addition, we are sending with them our brother, who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and co-worker among you. As for our brothers, they are our representatives of the churches and an honor to Christ. Therefore, show these men the proof of your love and the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it.
So that the churches can see it. And I think this is, when it comes to the attitude around money, and this is particularly in a fundraising context, but again, it's what is our attitude towards money? What do people see in us when it comes to money? If you don't have transparency, then something hidden, it makes people think, what's going on here? Handling money well speaks incredibly highly of our values. It's a demonstration of our values. And so, and Paul took pains to actually make it public, made it transparent. And he's saying, look, this is all up front. It's all clear. You can all see it. We're bringing in Titus as well. And we're going to make it so that there is no problem with our attitude and everybody knows how to handle it and how to relate to it. But what happens when our attitude is wrong? And there are symptoms that you can look at to define when your attitude towards money is wrong in a church context and others as well. If we don't have the right attitude, then we're going to miss out on seeing the transformational power of generosity. We're going to miss out on making disciples in this area, which quite often a lot of people do already. But then you'll see things that we can become wrongly motivated, possibly misunderstood, and then the church can start to become a little bit introverted, maybe serving itself or its members or its leaders, and then become isolated from the community. It's a slippery slope. Once a bad attitude towards money becomes public, then members and supporters just don't want to give generously. And so it robs us of the power of generosity. So our attitude is really important. Now, the second A is administration. If you have a good administrator in your church, honor them, bless them. If you don't have one, pray for one, because they are a blessing. It's a spiritual gift and they are an absolute blessing and they're not honored enough. So if you are an administrator, bless you. Well done for your service. You make a big difference. And scripturally, administration is to honor the Lord himself. In this context, it says we are going to administer this gift in order to honor the Lord. Administration serves the leadership and the mission incredibly well. And actually, if you don't have a good administrator or if you have poor administration, things can go badly wrong. And unfortunately, stewardship see this regularly. We have a number of accountants who end up serving churches who have problems, and we try to help them overcome the problems. And I'll go a little bit into more if we have time. But administration is an important A. Now, what happens if you don't have good administration? Well, if you fail to handle things in an efficient and safe way, then people are going to see it. People are going to feel it. You'll become a poor steward of their generosity, their gifts. They're givers, stewarding God's resources and giving it to you. And if you don't administer that well, that's really not honoring to them or the Lord. And so this is really important, because money can be misspent, it can be misappropriated. Fraud happens in the church, and it happens more regularly than you think. We can tell a lot of stories, unfortunately, of things that have happened. And when this sort of thing happens, people lose confidence in giving and they cease to give. Church planting's hard enough without exposing yourself to greater risk when it comes to poor administration. So don't think you can do it all yourself. Please prepare. Even if you have a financial background, please prepare team. Please prepare others to draw it in, because you need that transparency to keep people safe from temptation as well. And the last A is accountability. Alex, just go for that red one, please.
We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift, for we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man.
And so transparency and accountability is absolutely vital. Avoiding criticism, taking pains, it's really interesting. I mean, we actually risk God's reputation if we have poor accountability, because social media and the public these days, they don't hang around. They are on it. and finances and charities haven't got a good history in recent times. So as the church, we should be ahead of the game and actually being at the forefront of demonstrating what good accountability is. Now, what does it look like when accountability goes wrong? Well, if you've got finances being handled by a single person, it's a massive risk. That's why I was saying it's a team game, please. You can't have one person just looking at the books. It's important for their sake, just to get rid of the temptation. You might not share financial information widely. Decisions get made without people being brought along the journey. I mean, I've been in a church previously, unfortunately, where we had one instance where the leaders were spending an X amount of money on something which was never being consulted with, and suddenly it had happened. And then you were like, well, hold on a second. I didn't realize my money was going to that. I knew nothing about, and it just causes bad feeling. So accountability is really important. And if we fail to do what's right in the eyes of man and in the eyes of God, then risk is just, it increases hugely. The unthinkable does happen. I won't share stories yet. But I wanted to share this with you as the AAA, because as leaders, you set the culture. So you need to know and understand what is required. Now, you don't need to do all of the doing, but it's your responsibility as leaders to ensure that the right people and the right processes and the right safeguards are in place when it comes to finances. We don't want church leaders to become accountants, God no, but we do need leaders to lead and put the right people in place who can do this. So that's the AAA. Now, I'm going to whistle stop into just some church planting models, because there are so many different models of how to do church, and lots of people call them different names, but this is not an exhaustive list at all, because God is far more creative than a list or the history of church planting. And there's some exciting things happening right now and going to be in the future. So that's just to give you a little bit of context that we can't touch all of this on this webinar. And here's some funding models. Again, lots of different ways that you can actually fund churches and church plants. And we've actually just done a little bit of a summary of these. So if you want a summary of the different types of funding models, we can send that to you in a separate document. But lots of people call these different things. But there's one model on here which we want to highlight briefly, because we think it can be transformational in church planting. And it's the Raising Personal Support, or MPD, which is Ministry Partner Development. So let's spend a few moments just looking at this. What is raising on support? Now, some of you may have done it, but I just want to unpack this. Raising personal support is when somebody raises support to enable their ministry by establishing partnerships with people who help to support them. It's a biblical model. We teach on this, and we go through things like the Levites and Israel, and how the Levites depended on the gifts of Israel because they had no portion themselves. Jesus and his disciples, they relied upon gifts from certain women. Paul and the early missionaries. We start to unpack all of this from a biblical perspective. It's a highly relational way, not to fundraise, but to raise up people to support you, to raise up partnerships in the gospel, to provide encouragement, to provide prayer, and to provide finances. And there are about 2,800 people around the world who use stewardship with this model to fund their ministry. But there are other organizations that do it. The Message Trust, Fusion, IFES, YWAM, OM. There's lots and lots of major charities who are mobilizing significant numbers of people that use this model. But we don't often look at it in the church. And that's why I wanted to highlight it here. Because with an individual partner account with stewardship and the training that we provide, it can be really transformational, especially in church planting. We've got about 75 people who are using this at the moment to plant churches with stewardship. So why consider this? Well, it's really, really important because it activates givers. It activates receivers. It challenges the heart, and it releases God in that whole provision of money for mission. And I think that when people start talking about money earlier on in relational ways, then they mature a lot quicker. This is for people who are working 21 hours a week or more in Christian ministry. That's the threshold that you can start this or apply for it. You can get gift aid. We do the direct debits for all of the donations. We do the gift aid claims and pass that on to you, less a fee. But it's about partnership. And I'm not going to go through some of the other bullet points because this is from I won't go into Newcastle United because I'm just too passionate about that and it'll take too long. But the idea is that it's not just the football players on the pitch who get to do the run around and score the goals. No. Team is bigger than those 11 players. Team is the coaches, the physios, the administrators behind the scenes, the cleaners. That's the idea. Everybody gets involved when it comes to partnering on the gospel and ministry partnership development. So here's a few things to consider. When you're raising your own support and you are inviting others to partner with you, this model increases the ability to recruit more leaders more quickly with less resource. You don't have to wait to employ somebody and pay them £25,000-30,000, but because you're waiting to get that money, you can release people right from Bible college and they can actually raise their own support while they're doing theological training in Bible college, and then go into ministry with a support base already when they come out of theological training. So it's really, really interesting. It's a seamless launch pad into funded ministry. It decreases central funding, and so there's no fundraising burden on charities and churches or central bodies. It's you can replicate it. It's highly relational. It's scalable. It's sustainable. All of those things on the screen. I would just say that as one model to fund church planting, it's a no-brainer, because we keep on talking about new wine and new wineskins spiritually. Well, actually, practically, this is a new wineskin to allow a flow of generosity to turn into mission. So we're quite excited about that and wanted to share that with you. I'm not going to go into this one, but I will send the slides if you want them so that you can actually go into it later on. It's just about the sustainability and the relational aspects of it. Then I'm going to just hand over to Alex to talk about a church that actually did this. And so, Alex, over to you.
Yeah, great. So one of the things I love about what I do is I get to actually meet the church planters and connect with them, sort of hear them share the vision that God's put on their life. I met Ben in late 2020. And he shared a little bit with me, and this is all on a blog on our website where there's a little bit more detail. But he'd been on holiday away with his family. They did a COVID staycation down to the Isle of Wight, and they just, as they were just walking around and exploring the island, they realised that there were a lot of churches that had been converted into flats or other buildings. And they did a kind of Google and sort of found that there hadn't been an evangelical church on the Isle of Wight in 60 years. And his wife turned around to him and said, do you think we could plant a church here? And it was one of those things that just a kind of something that was seeded that God then grew. And it came to a point where they were stepping out away from their church, which their home church was in Essex, to go and plant a church in the Isle of Wight. Walking by faith, a lot of that. They didn't know a lot of what that was going to look like. They didn't have any connections down on the island, but what they did have was a sending church and a community full of people who they'd been serving alongside for years, and who said, we don't know what we can offer, but we do want to sow into you guys as leaders, because we know you and we believe in you. So they opened a church partner account, an individual partner account with Stewardship. They did a fundraising day at their sending church. They had, I think it was between 40 and 50 members of their church commit to giving them X amount of money monthly for the first few years as they were stepping out to start planting on the Isle of Wight. What that meant practically for them was that covered their entire cost of living. Neither of them had to take jobs once they moved to the island. They registered as self-employed, and effectively their salary was covered. So they were able to move to the island and just spent 6 months focusing on building relationships within the local community. They also had some great admin people around them when they formed the charity for the church. Tim, who was their chair of trustees, absolutely fantastic around the administration side. I heard someone once say, Show me a church planter who loves admin, and I'll show you a church plant that's not going to make it. And although there's a bit of a throwaway comment, but actually Ben was very open and said, it's not my strong suit, but I actually want to have those people in place around me who for whom that is their strong suit. And so they were able to, for the first couple of years, do that as the church started, and as the congregation grew organically, and as the giving into the new church plant grew, it got to a point where eventually they were able to transition away from that support raising model and into an employed role within the church plant. But what it enabled them to do was focus all of their time, even though they weren't receiving a salary from the charity, focus all of their time on building relationships in their local community. So yeah, that's sort of, there's a little, like John said, it's one example, but it's an example that has proved in stewardship to be extremely effective when it comes to planting churches. Yeah, back to you, John.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Alex. I will. I'll leave it there actually. And Christian, I've got some resource pages at the end. So look, there's some resources here which we've just hyperlinked through, but would love to just take some questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, John. I've got pages of notes from you. So that's brilliant and very helpful. So just for everyone on the call, what would help is if you drop, as many are doing, your question into the chat. That will just help us see what you want more on. And also people may have questions that we pair up together. So I'll try and call out questions as I see them. Let me just say thank you to John. John, thank you to you. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, I talked to you about my son who wanted to take a year out.
Oh, yes.
And we couldn't work out how to do the partner support thing. And we thought it would work. And I don't know if you remember, because you probably do this for lots of people, but you actually talked him through the system. It was already made. Yeah. And what I loved about that is it moved something from being a dream that could have flopped because the practicalities weren't in place, or Philip could have ended up spending all of his time figuring out a financial system when really he wanted to be doing food bank and helping people volunteer in the church and doing that stuff. And so that worked. It worked fantastically for him, and it sorted out all the tax, the collecting, the gift aid, everything that you explained was fantastic. So I can say firsthand, I've seen how effective that can be, and I think a very flexible model. I know the Fusion guys as well. I know it works really well for them, so that's great.
Wonderful.
Gareth was asking a question. Abby, could you just spotlight Gareth? And Gareth, are you happy just to ask your question? Gareth's recently been on the TV. He started a wrestling church.
Oh wow, brilliant.
So that's a new one. So wrestling church in Bradford, it's going well. Gareth, do you want to just check out your question about you were interested in this model?
Yes, I was looking at the MPD model, mainly because at the moment it's all done voluntarily. Okay. So we run events monthly, and we have like a weekly training school where we're teaching people. And all of that's really evangelistic. So we're seeing people come to faith, we're baptizing people.
Come on.
But really we want to transition into having something that's a little more regular for the discipleship of these people.
Yeah.
I currently work full-time for Green Pastures, a homelessness charity. And so I'm looking at the MPD model and thinking, is that a way for me to potentially raise funds to be able to pay me to drop a day and give more time to this, or for that to kind of help with kind of funding the project itself? You know, we pay the wrestlers, we pay the staff, we ticket one event, but we keep the churchy ones that we do as free. So kind of, you know, sometimes we're at a bit of a loss on some of the events. So there's another potential way of doing that. But yeah, just want to kind of explore that with you guys and see what you think.
No, that's great. Thanks for the question, man. And it sounds fantastic, Church. So what's quite interesting and slightly shocking is the reason that we can do what we do is because HMRC and the Charity Commission, they basically were allowed to do this because of relief of poverty. Now, quite often people in ministry don't get paid enough, and the government recognize that. And so we're able to provide this service as a charitable objective of relief of poverty. That's the reality of it. until generosity shapes the church a bit more. But you're absolutely right. If you're already in Christian ministry, and you may be a vicar, you may be launching wrestling church or whatever it looks like, if you're in ministry for 21 hours a week or more, but you're not getting paid what is deemed sufficient, and we'll do a financial assessment on an application, then it might be used, this MPD model might be used as a top-up.
Right, okay.
Or if you've got employment which isn't Christian work, but you've got 21 hours a week or more of Christian work, then you can actually apply as well. And you can have the two running side by side. And again, we just do a financial assessment to understand how much is your target, because people forget things like pensions. We don't want people launching passionately just into ministry and forgetting the future. So, but yes, absolutely no reason, Gareth, to have that conversation.
Right, cool.
That's amazing. Thanks, Gareth. Can I just run through there were a few other questions on the MPD model. Ben was asking, is there any particular benefit to funding the individual as opposed to the donation going to the charity or the church?
It's
just a different model. I mean, Alex, do you want to speak into that one?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think one of the key things is, particularly as a new charity starting out, as a church starting out, when you employ someone, you are bound by all of the stipulations that come with employment law. So you have to have a contract, a job description, you have to be paying at least minimum wage, you have to be hitting all of those things. With the support raising model, yeah, ultimately we do want people to be raising support so that they're not under living wage, but that may take time to build up to that. So what this enables you to do is to register as self-employed, and so a lot of those administrative complications that would come from employing a person, and also a large financial drain on a charitable organisation early on, can actually be, you can find a way of working which doesn't put too much on a startup charity early on. So I would say that's probably one of the key things that we would emphasize around that model.
You can do it as well, where people raise their own support, and I don't want to complicate it, but there is two ways of doing this. But from a church planting perspective, I think that it's a helpful one around the individual being self-employed and then going, but it can be done the other way, where people raise support, give to a central charity, but they have to get that really right to get employment law right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Linda had a question. Does this favor the people who have the more obvious frontline ministry? What about an administrator, or could the treasurer do this, or is it harder? What have you seen in that respect?
I think, it's a really helpful question, because administration isn't sexy, is it? And I think what is important is culture, because if you're able to create an organization or to form an organization that has a culture of interdependence on each other and with God, and it's founded on generosity, then actually there's not just the giving within the church, but there's also when somebody has that culture in their heart and in their lifestyle, that when they're talking to friends, acquaintances, colleagues, people beyond the church, they can reach a lot more people than the church can itself. And I think that there's something powerful about that invitation as well, when it's a personal invitation and it's people who love you, who respect you, who want to honor you and walk with you, because it's a calling sometimes, isn't it? God calls us to be part of his mission. And so when you unpack that personally, that's really compelling, because it's a heart-to-heart thing. So yeah, I understand what you're saying though, but people do it.
Thanks. Question from Mac on the same thing. He's asking, is there any conflict of interest between someone who maybe they're the lead planter, they're raising money in this model, but they're also raising money for the whole church? Is there any conflict of interest there? I saw an aspect of that when we had a lot of the fusion team in the church, in that I noticed some people probably dropped their giving to the church because they wanted to support an individual, and we just sort of took the view that overall we were releasing generosity, and we didn't want to fiddle with that too much, but we recognized we need to release these individuals who are in our church. We do need to fund the ministry of the church.
Yes.
So do you think there's a conflict of interest there for the lead planter?
So I wouldn't say a conflict of interest. I would say that it's important to have good pastoral conversations, and to set expectations as well, because like Ben and Emma, I mean, they started off, Alex, raising financial support and then becoming employees, didn't they?
Yeah.
So there was this time where they had people supporting them financially through this MPD model, but the church was being established and growing, and people were giving to the church. And there's just need clear communication about who are you giving to, how much are you giving, and actually let's just be absolutely crystal clear what the journey ahead looks like, whether it maintains within ministry partner development or whether it becomes employment in time when the church can afford it. Yeah. Just transparency is really important.
And they were clear with their sending church and with the new church as well. You know, they were clear that, you know, we believe your tithe, the first fruit, belongs in the house of God. But if you want to give over and beyond that, then, you know, this is what this support will enable us to carry on doing within the ministry. So, you know, that's an ideal world situation, absolutely. But that's, like John said, pastoral conversations around that are key, I think.
Yeah, that's great. John Turner's giving you a big thumbs up. He said he was an itinerant evangelist, went through, had lots of conversations. 95% people. I think you should hire John if he's getting a 95% success rate. But that speaks powerfully, really, of putting a face to some work that God's doing through a person. How ready people are to step in. Abby asked, does this work? Is this different in a different socio-economic context? Is this just a bit middle class? Could it work in an estate context, or is something going to be different there, or is going to be harder in that context?
There is an absolute reality to that question, so thank you for asking it. It's really, really important. We know that some of the people in, for example, the 20 schemes in Scotland, they're doing some fantastic work on estates, and Helen Shannon in London's doing some incredible ministries in there is a reality to that. If a person wants to launch into ministry and they are a lot of their friends and families and acquaintances are in areas of poverty and deprivation, then actually there needs to be a strategic discussion around church planting and how that is funded from outside as well, or from within. But within, it depends on their setting, and whether it's Church of England or whatever the group it is, there needs to be some proper strategic conversations around church planting on how to fund ministry into those areas, because there's not enough of those conversations. So yes, it does have an impact. But God's generosity, think back to the Macedonian church, faith transforms, and God's generosity was unbelievable. So, yeah.
I've got a big question for you, but there's a bit of a pivot. So I'd like to just stick with some that are in the chat that stay on this theme a bit. I don't know their name, but somebody put in their chat a question about it's often harder to fund for people and the work they do sometimes, and maybe this is more for grants, perhaps, buildings, capital projects, fixing a church organ, tangible assets. Do you have any comment on that? What do you see in stewardship? I guess there's a whole range of givers, and givers have different interests, so that's part of it. But you're particularly advocating here for the funding of people's working time.
Well, I think within this context of church planting, that was what we wanted to focus on. It's how do we release church planters, because there needs to be a wider pool of new leaders and new planters coming through for greater mission. But when it comes to, I think it's just the difference between what is fundraising for charities and what is, support raising for individuals in ministry. There's loads and loads of materials that we have, technical materials, practical materials around fundraising for charities on capital appeals and different projects. So we can also help in that way. But just that we didn't want to dive into that because it would have kind of spread us a little bit thin for this time.
different topic. Yeah,
But definitely get in touch with us for that sort of thing. We do it all the time, for sure.
That's excellent. Linda was asking, does this play out differently with under 40s? That, you know, as you said at the very beginning, there are cultures of financial thinking that are passed on to us through our upbringing, through our society and media.
Yes.
Do you see differences? I've seen it as a church leader, the difference between older generations who they start their standing order and it will never stop because that's how they were brought up.
Yeah.
And then sometimes others who are maybe a bit younger tell me they're having a giving holiday, which I hadn't heard of, but it means they need to hold back some of their cash for a while. So do you see differences in generations, or even the mechanisms that you use to work with how different people think?
Very, very much so. Very much so. I think different generations have different values, even though they are actively living out their faith. And so, yes, you're right. Different cultures for different generations is absolutely true. And the younger generation, I think, they want to be more involved. They want to be in the grassroots. They want to be owning and part of this. Alex, I mean, do you want to? Because I'm not young.
Yeah, I would say. Well, there is a practical thing of there is a certain age that people get to where they tend to have more capacity for generosity, just because, you know, they've got a bit more stability, they've been working for several years, they have more money in savings, etc., etc. So the tendency is that as people become more well established, you know, married and kind of in that season of life, they then tend to have more capacity for generosity, yes. But I think in terms of, as well as this, the heart of, certainly I'm a millennial, but I've got 3 younger brothers who are all Gen Z. And certainly in that upcoming generation, there's a real heart for what can I do to make a difference in the world? Yeah. And that's a huge evangelistic opportunity. I think there's a lot. I lead the young adults at our local church, and a lot of the questions that are being asked right now are not around the subject of how can I be a good person, but it's actually how can I find my identity and how can I find my identity and how can I make a difference in the world? Mm-hmm. And so I would say there is a real heart for that in the younger generation. It is just the internet is a place that offers you a lot of places where you can find that answer. And so actually we as the church have a huge call and responsibility here to our young people to, you know, all of those scriptures in the Old Testament, if they fail to tell the next generation and a whole generation falls away, actually, you know, that's upon us right now is to tell the next generation what God's done. Yeah.
That's cool.
That's fantastic. I've got a couple of different questions, but if others have other topics they want to pick up with your general presentation, and while we've got you really with your experience in the room, do drop that in the chat. The first is I was going to ask you about microfunding. So in the York Diocese, they've been doing that, and it's been really wonderful to see how that's released unexpected wisdom in often overlooked places. So what they've often done is it's limited to maybe funding someone for a day a week to do more of something they're already doing. So they already need to be doing it in their own time for free. And then this is saying can we help you put more hours into this? And then it's a reducing funding. So the first year you get 100%, but then it drops off. So it's not employing someone, it's sowing something and then allowing either the ministry to develop an obvious worth, I guess, that it would attract more permanent funding from the local church, or that the person might have other thoughts of. But I thought of that because you were talking about really your big goal is to release lots of leaders, and that's one way I'm seeing some leaders being released in a context. Any thoughts on that? Or models of releasing people that look like that?
To be honest, I haven't come across it, and I'd love to find out a little bit more. Okay. It sounds, I mean, there's lots of innovative ways that we need to be thinking around things. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to be encouraging conversations within stewardship is how we can help non-charity churches do money well, and the funding of that. So that's an internal conversation, because actually God's doing things in different ways that we need to adjust to. And there's different models being released. So I'd love to look at that microfunding one, but we're also looking at different things. We don't have anything, ta-da, here's it ready, but actually we need to be thinking these through and challenging ourselves on how we can do things differently, because God is moving and we need to adapt. So sorry, I haven't got an answer really.
No, that's great. We might look at that. We could maybe do one of these or a recording just to pick up some of that, just to share something that's happening. Sometimes it's just to help a good idea spread. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Okay, another one I'd love your comment on. I was chatting to a colleague on Monday, and he was talking about bivocational and co-vocational models of ministry, and he was even at the point of saying, are there even opportunities where we could provide two types of training simultaneously? So we could train someone to be a pastor and a plumber at the same time, to be an electrician and an evangelist at the same time. I don't know how the numbers would work with that, but I love the heart, because I think we're very wedded in the West to an idea that ministry is either a hobby, or it's a full-time job for life, and someone somewhere pays you. And you're proposing a lot of creative activity in the middle. And of course, most of our biblical people that we look to, like Paul, he had people that supported him. He had churches that supported him or gave him respite. And then, like many rabbis, he had a basic trade, which I think was fixing, was it sails or tents? But anyway, he had a trade, and that was normal, wasn't it? Jesus may well have done some carpentry. He was also supported by wealthy women. People would have given him donations. So even our biblical models are much more hybrid. And I've got friends who actually feel a calling, not just to work in the church, but a calling to something that you might think of as a non-spiritual thing, but they want to be a teacher,
absolutely,
and a pastor, or they want to be a plumber, or whatever it might be. So have you seen any of that? Any thoughts? I think that could be a radical shift. I mean, I'm at a teaching college. I wonder if we're not backing enough models, and we ought to have a plumbing module, because that would be a really good way to train some pioneers.
Do you know what?
They're not reliant on somebody paying them a full salary, and that will be the holdback from them doing their job. What do you think?
I think the more creativity we have, the more we reflect who God is. So we definitely need to do that, because the whole point with Paul being a tent maker, he used that to reach Priscilla and Aquila. Do you know what I mean? It was like, if you're stuck in a church, in the mindset of a church, you're not going to reach people out of the church. So if there are models of funding which help you fund your ministry and also help you to reach to other people, absolutely all for it. I think the conversation needs to then go to how is that maintained and sustained, and how you build team in the background, because there will then be stresses on the amount of time in ministry, pastoral care, all that kind of stuff. And as long as you set up teams and release people in their giftings, so that it doesn't all fall on the burden of the leader, then I think it's a great idea.
And have you seen it used as a way of people transitioning? I have known of people that have gone from a trade, and they've sort of, that they haven't left it instantly. They've grown it, and it sounds like the framework you've used could facilitate that in a helpful way. They could start doing so many hours, etc.
Yeah, I don't see why not, because there's the 21-hour threshold for this particular model is just because it's what the Charity Commission deemed to be full-time work. So if you're doing training, whatever it is, whether it's a brickie or Bible college, but let's go for the brickie. You could be doing that training and then reaching out to and reaching out into the construction industry, but also having this MPD model running alongside each other, I think there could be all kinds of things coming from that. So yeah, why not try it?
That's fantastic. I wonder where we've got to with questions. Do others have any questions? You could just unmic and chip in if you want. We don't want to run on longer than we have questions, but we don't want to lose these guys while we've got them available. John, I think you're going for it, and then Linda. Should we do that? John, do you want to go first?
Do you mean me?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I hadn't put my hand up yet. I was still just formulating my question, but I had unmuted. Well spotted. Yeah, well, we're trying to reopen a closed church building, which is a fantastic place in the centre of Bradford and near the university. And it's quite a complex project. We're planning to run a soft play cafe and escape room. So it's basically we're planning to fund it through social enterprise. Mm-hmm. We've got a sushi takeaway in there, believe it or not, run by some Christian Nepalese guys.
Oh,
wow. And so I suppose my question is how viable that is, that sort of model funding, and how I've said to people, we need to apply for, sort of grants for the first 2 years, 100%, and the second, third and fourth year, 60%, and the fifth and sixth years, 30%, and then aim within 6 years for it to be self-funding or something. Do you feel that's the right sort of model, or have you experienced that would help me think more clearly about that?
I think there's probably some things that we could speak into to possibly help, John. I mean, we know. Have you already got? You've already got the building, and it's already established, and you're just.
We've got the building. There's a bit of work to do on it. There's no heating. Okay. Well, we've put in some heating at one end. There's a bit of work to do on it. Yeah. However, every time I think about giving up on the project, God does something to keep me going. And one problem we had was soft play equipment's really expensive. And then somebody gave us £80,000 worth for 3,000 quid about 6 months ago.
So good.
Wow. So that's sitting there waiting to be installed and used. So I do feel it's a God thing, but.
Well, I think whoever the overarching charity is for that outreach. I think having a good fundraising strategy and then getting some assistance on what does that need to look like, what could be the right types of trusts and to go for, and what percentage of income should be on trust, should be fundraised for. So I think getting a proper fundraising strategy in place would be great, and then get a business case that you can actually share so that people can see what the impact is going to be if they're going to invest in it. I think that sounds quite compelling though. Great. I love the sushi.
Fantastic. I was going to say fantastic idea with an escape room as well.
Yeah, we have an escape room planned. Yes.
Brilliant.
Behind where the organ used to be.
That's wonderful.
Wow, brilliant. Linda, you were next, and then Ben, if we can.
Yeah, it was more of a comment really than a question. I mean, I'm ops manager of a resource church in a very deprived town, and so I'm actually at the moment trying to look at sustainability in 5 years. And I have to say, at the moment, with a business head on it, it actually doesn't add up. And so we're looking at some of the kind of the part-time roles, but some of the big things that we're coming against is actually, like you've mentioned, how do you then maintain a really good work-life balance? Because actually these people feel called to it, so they tend to give more than just the hours, and actually honouring that well is actually really tough. And we actually then rule out an awful lot of applicants that would apply because actually they need to be breadwinners for their family. So it was just more of a comment where, I'm very much trying to figure out what 3 years down the line looks for us at the minute. But I have to say, as a bigger church plant that's been set up with initial funding, actually our biggest challenge is what does that look like in 3 years? And I have to say our giving numbers are quite good, but as I've mentioned earlier, actually the under 40s, it's a really striking difference between what they'll be willing to put their money to. So yeah, I think a lot of our questions at the moment is I'm not sure congregational giving actually will sustain the model that we've got. And actually, so it's interesting looking at all the different kind of enterprise models. And then again, it's, well, how much time and how do you decide between an event that's going to make money than an event that's just going to point people to Jesus but not bring anything in?
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's fascinating. So it's more of a comment than a question. But
no, it's a tricky thing when you're launched with investment and then going into that sustainability. How you do that well over the period of time, it requires a lot of planning and thought and creativity. So bless you, Linda. I hope it goes well. But if you want to chat about it, we'll happily chat about it, see how we can help.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely made a note.
No problem.
Thanks very much. Ben, you got the last question.
Amazing. Well, if it's okay, I'm going to slightly direct it more at John, who was just speaking, just asking about the social enterprise thing, because I was just kind of curious in a bit more of like doing things that churches don't traditionally do, like soft play, escape room, that sort of thing, and just thinking about how to consider broadening like what to do as a kind of funding strategy. I just kind of wonder like how you went on that journey and any wisdom on that.
You're asking me?
I am, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to tell you, we simply looked at this incredible space that the diocese were going to sell for a pittance in an area of Bradford where there's almost no Christian presence or witness at all, and said, Lord, if this building was built for your glory, for your kingdom, if we rescued it from being sold and demolished or turned into a warehouse, what could you use it for? And, a few of the team just began wandering around praying in it. And we began to sort of think about, the high roof. And I mean, we've talked about installing at some point in the future, hopefully a Go Ape type of high ropes course. And just kind of taking this wow factor you get with an incredible old church building, and instead of just moaning about how difficult it is to maintain and heat, make a what's the word for it? Can't think of the phrase, but he's making use of the goodness of that incredible architecture, really. And the sushi takeaway, honestly, I can tell you, we've got 6 Nepalese families in our church who are refugees from Bhutan. That's another story. They just came up to me one day and said, John, have you got any space anywhere in our church buildings where we could have a kitchen and sell sushi? And I said, funnily enough, we've got just the place. So it really was just that sense of, Lord, what Tier Fund have a question they ask, which is, what have you got in your hands?
Yes.
And it was that sort of sense of, okay, well, what's emerging already? And sometimes it seems so slow because we started this 5 years ago that I do feel like giving up, and I think we must have misheard the Lord. But then he keeps doing new things. So I spoke at a conference in September, another church weekend away. Somebody came up to me afterwards and offered me 2 years' money to employ a project manager. So, it's that sort of thing that you just think, whoa.
It's so good.
Thanks, John. Great question, Ben.
Can I tell a quick story just for somebody? I was just
going to say, John and Alex, final word from you, and would you just pray and bless us as we close? So final words for you two guys.
Brilliant. So we know a church in Kent who launched their church as a church plant, but they had a cafe, they had rooms for rent, and they had connections with the local education, and through connections with local authorities, they actually got their church new built for free.
Mm.
And so there are ways to do this, and we can connect you with different people with different bits of know-how. But God is so creative, and I think we've got to just get ready and be creative ourselves and go with the flow on this.
Yeah.
So it's exciting times ahead.
Yeah, and to add to that, I visited a church recently down in Cornwall, and it's got a half pipe in it. So there's some amazing things that
Wonderful
churches are doing with their spaces, and it's really cool.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Shall I pray?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for your time. Lord Jesus, we just are delighted to be involved in your mission. thank you so much that we get to be involved with the creator of the universe. And Lord, we pray that you would come and fill us with all of your creativity, and that you would just lavish your grace upon us and your resources upon us. Help us to get active in our generosity and stewarding of your resources, so that we can help to fuel your mission. Lord, I pray that you would just inspire everybody on this call, and that your favor would be upon them in their situations, and let we just pray that you would be glorified in everything that we do. But thank you for this time, and I pray that there would be good takeaways that we can practically act on. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. John and Alex, thank you so much for your wisdom, and I know you're happy to have follow-up chats. We'll send you a link with any of the resources that these guys are able to give us, and a link to the recording when we've posted that, or you can just look on the website in a day or so, and you'll find it in the resources section, and we'll be adding more things to that next year. Great to see you all, and we'll see you at something soon.